My curious friends, have you ever held a silk robe, felt its impossible lightness the way it falls like liquid over your skin? That weightless luxury hides a secret far heavier than it appears. Because this fabric, this symbol of imperial power and refined taste, begins its life in the darkness. It begins with a creature so humble, so fragile, that its entire existence is a quiet act of transformation. Picture the contrast. In a sunlit palace, a ruler wears silk that catches the light like captured water. Half a world away, in the silent gloom of a mulberry grove, a small worm begins to spin. This is the mystery we unravel today. How does this wilderness, this simple biological imperative, become the very fabric of opulence? It is a story of resilience, a story of metamorphosis. And to understand this single unbroken thread is to understand one of civilization's oldest desires, the need to weave beauty from the most unlikely of raw materials. It is a bridge between worlds, spun from a secret. Our story's true hero is the Bombyx mori, the silkworm. It is an unassuming creature, pale and soft, with a singular purpose. For weeks, it does nothing but eat. It consumes the leaves of the white mulberry tree with a relentless, quiet hunger. Imagine the leaf, a waxy surface, a faint, almost sweet scent released with each bite. This is the silkworm's entire world. It knows nothing of palaces or emperors. It knows only the imperative to eat, to grow, and then to transform. And then the shift. A biological clock ticks down. The worm stops eating. It becomes restless. It is preparing for its greatest act. It finds a quiet corner, a sheltered twig, and begins to spin. From a tiny opening near its mouth, it draws out a liquid protein. This liquid hardens on contact with the air, becoming a thread of incredible strength. A single thread. The worm moves its head in a precise figure-8 pattern, wrapping itself in this shimmering filament. It is building its tomb. For that is the paradox. The cocoon is a fortress, a protective shell where the worm will dissolve into a soupy liquid and reconstitute itself as a moth. It is an act of self-destruction to enable rebirth. But for the humans who discovered this secret, the cocoon was not a tomb. It was a treasure chest. The architect, in creating its own sanctuary, had inadvertently created one of the most sought-after materials in history. The strength of this single continuous thread, which can stretch for nearly a kilometer, is astonishing. It is stronger, filament for filament, than a strand of steel. This fragile worm in its dark little corner was spinning the foundation of empires. Legend tells us the secret was discovered by a Chinese empress named Leizu. She was sipping tea in her garden when a cocoon fell from a mulberry tree into her cup. The hot water began to loosen the sticky protein, or saracen, that holds the cocoon together. As she fished it out, she found she could unravel it. A single, glorious, endless thread began to unwind in her fingers. It was a moment of pure, accidental genius. She saw the potential where others saw only a bug's nest. The Chinese emperors who followed her understood the power of this discovery. They realized that silk was more than a beautiful fabric. It was a form of currency, a tool of diplomacy, a weapon. They established a monopoly. The knowledge of sericulture, the raising of silkworms, and the unreeling of their cocoons became a state secret, guarded as fiercely as any military plan. To reveal the secret to outsiders was punishable by death. For nearly 3,000 years, China held the world hostage to its thread. Imagine the imperial silks of that era, colors that the rest of the world could not even comprehend. Deep, vibrant crimsons from the madder root, luminous blues from indigo, a brilliant yellow achieved through a complex process involving the gardenia flower. These were not just colors, they were manifestations of exclusive knowledge. The cocoon itself, this small, off-white oval, was more valuable than gold. It was the key to a luxury so profound, it could define an entire civilization's relationship with the world. China became the Ceres, the legendary land of silk, a place that existed in the imagination of the West as a realm of unimaginable wealth and mystery, all built on the back of a silent, spinning worm. But secrets have a way of escaping. The hunger for this fabric was too great, and so the thread began its most dangerous journey, out of the sheltered imperial gardens and into the unforgiving wilderness. This was the Silk Road. Forget the romantic idea of a single paved highway. It was a sprawling, ragged network of trails connecting east to west, a wilderness of ambition. Picture the caravan, a line of shaggy Bactrian camels, their breath misting in the thin, cold air of the Pamir Mountains. They are loaded not with gold, but with bales of raw silk, lighter than anything else of comparable value. This was the genius of it. A single camel could carry a fortune, but that fortune was terrifyingly fragile. The silks had to be protected from the relentless dust, from sudden storms, from the desperate eyes of bandits who haunted the high passes. The journey was a sensory overload, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the scorching sun of the Taklamakan Desert, a name that translates to place of no return, the bone-deep cold of nights on the Tibetan plateau. And through it all, the scent of it all, leather, animal sweat, and the faint, tantalizing perfume of exotic spices carried alongside the silk. These caravans were not just traders, they were moving cities of endurance. They carried letters between kings, they transported religions, Buddhism moving west, Nestorian Christianity moving east. The silk was the currency, but the real commodity was connection. It was a fragile thread of trust stretched across a continent, every mile a gamble against a harsh and indifferent landscape. When these precious bales finally arrived in the distant workshops of Byzantium or Persia, they presented a new mystery. The traders had brought the raw material, but what was it? How did one turn this compact, tangled mass of thread into the legendary fabric? This was the next great alchemy. The secret of the worm was matched by the secret of the loom. The process began with the careful, painstaking unreeling of the cocoons. They were softened in warm water, just as the Empress Leizu had discovered centuries before. But then came the real magic. A single cocoon yields a filament nearly a kilometer long. These incredibly fine, strong threads were twisted together, a process called throwing, to create a yarn strong enough to withstand the tension of the loom. This was not work for hurried hands. It required a Zen-like patience. Then, the weaver. The loom itself was a machine of revelation. Its rhythmic clatter, the thump of the beater, the shuffle of the heddles, was the sound of potential being unlocked. In the East, patterns were often woven directly into the fabric, a technique so complex it could take a year to produce a few meters. In the West, the Byzantines developed samite, a heavy silk woven with gold thread that glittered with divine authority. The Persians perfected the art of the tapestry, telling intricate stories in colored silk. This was the final transformation. The rough, dusty bales that had survived the wilderness of the road were now touched by the weaver's hand. They were transformed into something new. The hidden beauty of the single thread was multiplied, woven into patterns that spoke of an entirely different culture, a different aesthetic. The loom was not just a tool, it was a bridge. It took a Chinese secret and gave it a Persian soul, a Byzantine grandeur. In the dim light of these workshops, the true alchemy occurred, not just of fiber into fabric, but of a single culture's treasure into a shared human inheritance. The thread had survived the wilderness, and now it was ready to clothe the world. But this new fabric, this liquid light, came with a deep and troubling cost. For every civilization that embraced silk, it created a powerful tension, a pull between desire and morality, between beauty and ruin. Nowhere was this clearer than in Rome. To the Roman elite, silk was the ultimate status symbol. A senator wearing a translucent silk toga was making a statement of almost unimaginable wealth and connection to the exotic East. But the Roman treasury saw only the drain. Massive amounts of gold and silver were flowing out of the empire, heading east along the Silk Road to pay for this obsession. Pliny the Elder, the historian, estimated that Rome was spending 100 million sesterces every year on Eastern luxuries, with silk at the top of the list. He warned it was bleeding the empire dry. And then came the moral panic. The very qualities that made silk so desirable, its softness, its sheen, its revealing transparency, were attacked by philosophers and statesmen. They called it decadent, un-Roman. They said it was effeminate, that it weakened the moral fiber of the state. The critic Seneca railed against seeing men draped in the flimsy veils of women. Imagine the sensory contrast he was describing. The soothing, sensual softness of the fabric against the skin versus the harsh, judgmental words meant to shame its wearers. Silk became a symbol of everything that was wrong with a civilization grown too rich, too soft, too connected to foreign ways. It was caught in a paradox. It represented the peak of civilized luxury and, simultaneously, a fear of civilization's corruption and decline. The thread that connected empires also seemed to threaten to unravel them from within. This tension wasn't just Roman. In China, the emperors who hoarded the secret also feared its spread. The penalty for smuggling silkworm eggs or mulberry seeds out of the country was execution. The fabric was a tool of control. It was given as gifts to subordinate kings to secure their loyalty. It was used to pay nomadic tribes along the border to keep them from attacking. Silk wasn't just beautiful. It was geopolitical currency. Its value created shadows, black markets, espionage, and inevitable betrayal. The very opulence it created carried within it the seeds of conflict, envy, and a deep anxiety about losing an exclusive advantage. The price of opulence was a perpetual state of vigilance and fear. So how did we get from a fiercely guarded state secret to the silk blouse you might find in a department store today? The story takes one final, decisive turn. The secret, of course, did eventually escape. According to legend, it was smuggled out in the hollowed-out staffs of Byzantine monks or hidden in the hair of a Persian princess. By the 6th century, sericulture was established in the Byzantine Empire, but the true modern revolution was not about stealing the worm. It was about understanding it. The age of science unraveled the mystery. We now know the exact chemical structure of fibroin, the protein that makes up the silk thread. We can study the silkworm's genetics. We can create synthetic versions, polyesters and nylons that mimic the sheen and drape of silk at a fraction of the cost. This was a profound shift, from guarded, almost mystical craft to reproducible laboratory science. The wilderness had been fully mapped. But here is the fascinating modern tension. Walk into a store today and you have a choice. You can run your fingers over a shirt made of polyester. It will be smooth. It might even shimmer. But then, Find a garment made of pure mulberry silk. Feel the difference. It is cooler to the touch. It has a deeper, more subdued luster, a glow rather than a shine. It breathes. This is the enduring legacy. The science gave us alternatives, but it could not replicate the entire history, the specific biology, the terroir of the mulberry leaf and the Bombyx mori. Authentic silk still carries the weight of that ancient story in its very fibers. And so the thread finds itself in a new loom, the modern global economy. It is no longer the exclusive property of emperors. It is woven into the saris of Indian brides, the neckties of European executives, the linings of bespoke suits. Its meaning has multiplied. It can be a symbol of timeless tradition or cutting-edge fashion. The cultural weight remains, but it has been distributed, shared, and reinterpreted 1,000 times over. The journey from exclusive luxury to accessible beauty is complete. Yet when you choose the real silk over the synthetic copy, you are, in a small way, voting for that ancient story, for the resilience of the worm, the patience of the weaver, and the wild, dangerous journey of the caravan. You are touching a thread that connects you not just to a maker, but to a memory written in protein, spun in darkness, and polished by centuries of human desire. So here we are, my friends, holding both ends of the same unbroken line. The modern thread in your hand is a direct descendant of that first cocoon unraveled in an imperial teacup. It connects us to that silent architect in the mulberry leaves, to the weary caravan driver squinting against the desert sun, to the weaver whose loom clattered with revelation. This is more than a history of a fabric. It is a story of our own resilience. It is a map of our desire to find light, to create beauty, to transform the raw materials of our world and of ourselves into something extraordinary. The silkworm's metamorphosis is our own metaphor. We all spin our own cocoons of habit and safety, and true growth often requires that same brave dissolving act before we can emerge into a new form. Feel that texture once more, that cool, whispering touch. You are not just touching silk, you are touching patience. You are touching a secret that crossed mountains. You are touching a human hunger for wonder that no empire could fully contain. It is a thread spun from wilderness, woven by history, and finished by you. Where else in our world do we find such quiet, hidden revolutions? What other ordinary things around us hold an epic tale of transformation, just waiting for a curious mind to unravel it? The story is all around you. You simply have to learn how to look.